My dear. There was a young man once who looked at my old dented Buick, bless her rusted heart, and laughed. Said something cruel in front of folks who should have known better. I said nothing that day. Just smiled, started her up, and let the moment pass like a slow summer breeze. But weddings, oh, they do have a way of revealing things. Especially when you pull up in something quiet, sleek, and unexpected. If stories about pride, old wounds, and quiet reckonings speak to your soul, I'd love for you to subscribe, leave a comment when your heart feels moved, and share this with someone who's ever been underestimated. Come sit close now, because this one begins not with an insult, but with a promise I made to myself under a starlit sky. Shall we begin? The day he laughed at my old car, it was raining. One of those soft, sticky southern rains that makes the pavement hiss and your heart feel heavier than your grocery bags. I just pulled up outside the hardware store, needing mulch and a moment of peace. That's when he said it, loud enough for the teenagers nearby to snicker. Looks like someone's driving their car straight out of a junkyard love story. I didn't respond, just nodded politely like I'd been taught, and let the words roll off my back, or so it seemed. But something settled in me that day. Not anger, not revenge, just a quiet ember. The kind that burns long and slow. 3 years later, dressed in satin and pearls, I watched that same young man step out to greet his wedding guests. And when I rolled up in a brand new Tesla, pearl white, humming silent as a prayer, his smile faltered for just a beat too long. I didn't come to gloat, but oh, I came prepared. There's something about late summer that makes old memories rise like steam off the asphalt. You catch a certain scent, cut grass, motor oil, magnolias in bloom, and suddenly you're not 70 anymore. You're 35 again, knees aching from planting roses, or 52 with a teen behind the wheel, praying he remembers which pedal is which. The other day I was tidying my old glove box, cleaning out receipts and gum wrappers with Muffin, my cat, watching curiously from the passenger seat, when I found a photo. It was me years ago, standing next to that rust-colored Buick, smiling like I didn't have a care in the world. Lord, that car was a mess. The rearview hung crooked, the AC worked when it felt like it, and she smelled like garden soil no matter how many air fresheners I hung. But she got me where I needed to go. To church. To my sister's when her pipes burst. To the school when my grandson forgot his clarinet. She was faithful, and that mattered more than flash ever did. But the world doesn't always value quiet loyalty. Especially not folks like Brandon. Oh, we'll get to him. I hadn't thought of that boy in years, until I got the invitation. Cream cardstock. Gold embossed. A wedding invite with all the trimmings. And scribbled at the bottom, almost as an afterthought, was this. P.S. Bring your classic car. We'd love the aesthetic. I stared at that note for a long, long while. Brandon was never mine, not by blood. But I watched him grow like a weed through sidewalk cracks, resilient, sharp-edged, and always reaching for the light in his own way. His mama, Deborah, was one of my oldest friends. We met as girls folding laundry at the Methodist church, and bonded over our shared love of lemon bars and gospel harmonies. When Deborah passed suddenly, aneurysm, quick and cruel, Brandon was only 12. No father in the picture, no cousins willing to take him. I wasn't in a place to adopt him, not fully. But I did what I could. Drove him to school some mornings, packed him peanut butter sandwiches with the crusts cut off, helped with algebra homework even though I hadn't touched a graph since the Carter administration. He called me Miss Ellie. Never aunt or mama. Just Miss Ellie. I didn't mind. Respect has many forms. As he grew older, Brandon changed. Got taller, more handsome, sharp jaw, smirk that could melt or slice depending on the moment. He started hanging with boys who wore designer shoes and talked loud about things they didn't understand. He got a job at the country club, bussing tables first, then working valet. That's when it started, the obsession with cars. BMWs, Autis, the occasional Maserati. He'd study each one like scripture. And then there was my Buick. She was old even back then. Bronze with chipped paint and a sagging bumper. I loved her the way one loves a reliable old dog. Not for what she looked like, but for who she'd always been. Faithful. Familiar. Safe. Brandon hated that car. You really need to get rid of that piece of junk, Miss Ellie, he'd say. It's embarrassing. I'd smile, tell him she still ran just fine, and ask him if he wanted another slice of peach pie. But teenagers don't listen to peach pies. They listen to engines and Instagram likes. The distance between us stretched. When he turned 18, Brandon moved out. Said he was tired of small-town thinking. Got a job at a tech startup in Atlanta and never looked back. I'd hear from him now and then, holidays mostly. Short calls, longer silences. Then came the day outside the hardware store. He didn't know I'd be there. I'd pulled in just as he and his fiancée, pretty girl named Kayla, with glossy curls and heels too high for practicality, were walking out. I saw him look at my Buick, then turn to her and snort. Some folks really don't know when to let go. That was the moment. The words weren't new, but the look on his face, that mix of disdain and dismissal, something about it stayed with me. I didn't confront him, didn't even wave. But when that wedding invitation came, something inside me stirred. Because you see, what Brandon didn't know is that I just bought myself a brand new Tesla. Not for him, not for anyone else. For me. A little gift after decades of saving, fixing other people's messes, and quietly putting everyone before myself. It was time. And the wedding? Well, it seemed like the perfect occasion to introduce her to society. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and brittle, one of those southern autumn days where the sun still clings to summer but the breeze hints at what's to come. I stood in my driveway in a pale lavender dress, pearl buttons at the wrist, my straw hat perched just so, and my heart doing little skips beneath my ribs. The Tesla gleamed like a secret in the morning light. Pearl white, chrome trim, interior smoother than any church pew I'd ever sat on. She didn't roar, she whispered. A hum so soft you'd think the wind itself was driving. Now, my dear, I'll be honest. I'd never owned anything so fancy. The salesman at the dealership had looked at me sideways, as if I was buying it for a grandson. But I told him, no sir. This one's mine. I pulled up to the venue, a vineyard an hour outside Charleston, all rustic charm and overgrown elegance. There were hydrangeas in bloom, fairy lights strung across oak beams, and a valet station manned by two young boys barely older than Brandon when I met him. One of them opened my door, eyes wide as dinner plates. Ma'am, he said. This is wow. This is the 2025 model. It is, I said, handing him the key card with a wink. Be gentle with her. She's got a quiet soul. Inside, the music swelled. A string quartet playing something light and forgettable. Guests milled about, all pastels and champagne laughter. I recognized a few old neighbors, ladies from church, but I kept to myself, watching the way Kayla moved through the crowd like she'd been born to host. Then I saw him. Brandon, in a tailored navy suit, laughing with a group of groomsmen near the arbor. He looked happy, or at least like someone who thought happiness was something you could schedule between appetizers and the first dance. He hadn't seen me yet. I stepped forward, slow and deliberate, each heel tap a quiet declaration. People began to notice. Whispers, nods, glances like ripples in a pond. When Brandon finally turned, his face shifted. He covered it quickly, the way folks do when surprise stumbles into discomfort, but I saw it. That brief flicker of recognition. Of memory, and maybe, just maybe, of regret. Miss Ellie, he said, coming toward me with arms outstretched, voice a touch too loud, too performative. You made it. I let him hug me, a quick, polite thing. I did, I said, my smile gentle but unshakable. And thank you for inviting me. Though I confess, I didn't bring the Buick. Oh, his brows lifted. I gestured toward the valet station. She's resting now. I came in something a bit newer. His eyes followed my gaze, and when he saw the Tesla, sleek, still gleaming, his jaw clenched just barely. Is that yours? I said softly. Bought her last month. Figured it was time for something that runs quiet but carries weight. He didn't respond, just nodded, lips pressed thin. The air between us filled with something heavier than small talk. And then, as if fate weren't done stirring the pot, Kayla approached. Miss Ellie, I'm so glad you came, she said brightly, hugging me tight and too long like she'd been coached. Did you bring the classic car? We had a whole photo op planned. I tilted my head. I thought about it, but this one seemed more appropriate for the occasion. Her eyes followed Brandon's. Wait, that's yours. I just smiled. Some reckonings don't come with thunder. Sometimes they arrive on 4 quiet wheels and a full tank of grace. The ceremony passed like a soft breeze. Vows exchanged under a trellis of white roses, the crowd sighing on cue, and Brandon's voice steady but distant. I watched him closely from the 3rd row, my hat tilted just enough to shield my eyes from the sun. And maybe from a few truths too. There was beauty in the day, yes, but also tension like a thread pulled too tight. After the I do's, we moved to the reception lawn, where tables glimmered under linen and glass. I found a quiet corner near the water pitchers, preferring observation over conversation. Years of teaching had taught me, if you listen long enough, folks reveal more than they mean to. Brandon made his rounds, but his gaze kept drifting toward the valet. Or rather, toward the Tesla. It wasn't jealousy, not exactly. No, it was something thornier. That car didn't just hum with luxury. It hummed with proof that maybe I wasn't who he'd boxed me into all those years. Not a relic, not background noise, not someone to mock. He came over, drink in hand. Not tipsy yet, but with the looseness of someone who thinks he's safe among friends. You know, he said, his tone clipped. I didn't think electric cars were your thing. I sipped my sweet tea. Oh, I've grown. Turns out I like the silence. Guess you finally let go of that old clunker. I murmured. She served her purpose. Got me through storms. You don't forget cars like that. His jaw twitched. There it was, the thing he couldn't say. That he'd built an identity on escaping people like me, places like mine. And here I was, not behind, but ahead. Not clinging to the past, but gliding toward the future. I wasn't mocking you, you know, he said suddenly. That day outside the store. It was just a joke. I looked at him, steady. A joke loses its humor when it comes from someone who's forgotten his roots. He blinked. I raised you on casseroles and carpool. Not because I had to, because I chose to. He opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. I'm not angry, Brandon. Just disappointed that you forgot what loyalty looks like. Even if it came with rust and a squeaky axle. The silence between us stretched, not cruel but honest. Miss Ellie, he began, softer now. I shook my head gently. Go on now. It's your day. He lingered a beat longer, then turned back toward the crowd, shoulders straighter but eyes a little heavier. That was the moment, my dear, when I knew I hadn't come for revenge. I'd come to remind him. The afternoon softened as the sun dipped behind the vineyard hills, casting long golden shadows across the dance floor. Laughter mingled with the sound of clinking glasses and the low thump of a DJ easing into the evening set. Couples swayed. Children chased bubbles across the grass. But tension has a way of simmering under celebration. You can dress it in chiffon and boutonnieres, but it still finds its way to the surface, like sap beneath bark. I sat quietly at my table, stirring my tea with a silver spoon as Kayla's father took the microphone. His speech was warm, full of praise for his daughter and tentative approval of Brandon. Yet even he, in his pressed linen and practiced charm, stumbled slightly when trying to describe the groom's journey. Brandon's come a long way, he said, eyes flicking toward our table. From humble beginnings, to all of this. There was an odd pause, and I saw Brandon's jaw tighten. After the speech, Kayla came to sit beside me, cheeks flushed with champagne and sentiment. You know, she said, adjusting her veil, Brandon never talks much about his past. I know bits and pieces, his mom, you helping him, the town, but he brushes it off. I nodded, listening. He told me once he used to be ashamed of where he came from. I think he still is sometimes. That pierced deeper than I expected. Does he ever mention Deborah? I asked softly. Kayla hesitated. Only that she passed young. Not much else. I looked down at my hands. The veins now raised like river paths across my skin. Deborah had raised him with love and grit. Never fancy things, but always enough. And I'd filled in the cracks where I could. To know she was fading from his memory like an old photograph left in sunlight, it ached. Did you know, I said gently, that he once sold his sneakers in high school so his lab partner could afford their science fair project? That he carried a photo of his mama in his wallet till he was 17. She looked at me, startled. No, he's never said any of that. Well, I smiled faintly. Some things are buried so deep folks forget they ever mattered, until something brings them to the surface. Just then, a cousin spilled a tray of drinks near the dance floor. Laughter erupted. The DJ played a Motown classic and the dance floor filled with uncles and aunties who still knew how to swing their hips. But Brandon stood alone near the cake table, shoulders stiff, watching the crowd. And watching me. Later, as twilight curled into night, I walked back to the valet stand to stretch my legs. One of the young valets, a boy with thick curls and wide eyes, approached. "Ma'am," he said. "I hope it's okay, but I looked inside your car. That dashboard's like something out of Star Trek." I chuckled. "She is quite the marvel, isn't she?" He hesitated. "How'd you afford it? I mean, if you don't mind me asking." I paused, then answered simply. "Saved. Waited. Believed I was worth something that didn't need explaining." He nodded, then added, "Mr. Brandon asked me to park it way out back. Said it didn't fit the vibe." I blinked. There it was. The insult hidden beneath logistics. Brandon hadn't outgrown shame. He'd nurtured it. Fed it until it disguised itself as taste, as preference, as polished rejection. But I'd brought my car to remind him of where he came from, and who still believed in him even when he didn't. Night had folded fully around the vineyard by the time the breaking point arrived. The string lights glowed like fireflies, and laughter floated through the vines as the cake was cut. Guests leaned close for pictures and kisses, glasses clinked in cheers, and the DJ shifted to a slow ballad, the kind that makes folks sway with old memories under their breath. I stood by the fringe, near a rose arbor that smelled of late bloom and nostalgia. My Tesla sat in the shadows beyond the gravel lot, barely visible, tucked away like something to be ashamed of. Just as that valet boy had said, "I don't stir conflict unless it's necessary, my dear." But sometimes dignity demands presence. I walked back toward the main path, not rushed, not dramatic. Just steady. Kayla's voice called to me from across the crowd. "Miss Ellie, are you leaving already?" I smiled. "Oh no, sweetheart. I'm just going to fetch something." A few heads turned as I made my way through the crowd. Brandon was near the bar, his back half turned, sipping bourbon and laughing too loud at something no one else found funny. I passed him without stopping. 5 minutes later, I pulled the Tesla up the main drive, soft as breath, headlights aglow. The crowd turned as one, first in curiosity, then in realization. The car was a vision in the darkness. Sleek, modern, pristine. A quiet kind of majesty. She didn't roar, didn't beg attention. She earned it. Every eye fixed on her. I stepped out slow, dress catching the breeze, and let the moment breathe. Then, without raising my voice, I spoke, not to Brandon directly, but to the silence that fell like a hush after thunder. I was asked to park in the back. Said it didn't fit the vibe. Gasps. Whispers. A few brows lifted like shutters in a storm. "But I've found that shame," I continued, "doesn't belong to the thing that's tucked away. It belongs to the one who did the tucking." A few guests murmured, one woman even saying, "Well, that ain't right." Brandon moved then, shouldering his way toward me, face pale under the lights. "Miss Ellie, that wasn't meant how it sounded." "Oh, Brandon," I said, voice even. "It sounded exactly how it was meant. And that's the shame of it." He opened his mouth, but I held up my hand. "I didn't come to upstage your wedding. I came because your mother would have wanted someone who knew your first scraped knee, your spelling bee wins, your secret favorite hymn, to bear witness to this chapter." I paused, the air thick with reckoning. "But I won't be hidden, Brandon. Not anymore. Not for your comfort. Not to keep your curated life smooth." A hush fell so deep, even the DJ turned the volume down. Kayla moved forward, confusion and concern knitting her features. "What is this about?" Brandon hesitated. Then, in a voice raw and too honest, said, "It's about who I used to be, and who I didn't want to remember." The crowd looked from him to me. And my dear, sometimes the most powerful sound is a truth spoken too late. The truth, once spoken, doesn't fade quietly. It hangs there, thick, unblinking, waiting to be dealt with. Brandon's words sat between us like a crack in stained glass. Beautiful from a distance, but up close? Oh, you could see every fracture. Kayla's eyes darted from his to mine. "What does that mean, Brandon?" she asked, her voice tight. like someone suddenly unsure of the ground beneath her heels. He exhaled, hands twitching at his sides. It means, I didn't want people here to know who I used to be. That I was raised by women who didn't have much but gave everything. That I grew up in a house where the paint peeled, and the car was 20 years past its prime. His voice broke a little. I didn't want to be judged. Or pitted. And so you hit her? Kayla whispered. Miss Ellie. I didn't mean to, he said. It's just easier to pretend none of that happened when everything looks perfect. A silence wrapped around us. Not the kind that comforts, the kind that exposes. I didn't cry. That's never been my way. But my heart, oh my dear, it cracked. Not because of the shame, but because of how carefully he'd carved me out of his life to maintain the illusion. How he'd polished his image until there was no room left for the people who'd held him up when the world turned away. I was proud of you, I said softly. Even when you didn't write. Even when you called just once a year. I was proud. Not because of the suits or the car deals or the wedding with hors d'oeuvres I can't pronounce, but because I knew where you started. He looked down, unable to meet my gaze. You've taken everything we gave you. The casseroles, the carpools, the scraped-knee bandages, the silent sacrifices, and buried them under ambition like they were weeds instead of roots. Gasps flitted through the crowd like startled birds. Kayla stepped back, her hand falling from Brandon's arm. Her voice came quiet. Is that why your mother's picture isn't here? He didn't answer. And in that absence, the truth rang louder than any toast. Someone from the crowd. An older man I didn't know muttered. You don't erase the hands that raised you. Another voice, a woman near the hydrangeas. I always wondered why Miss Ellie wasn't in any of the engagement posts. And just like that, the room Brandon had so carefully constructed, curated, polished, perfected, began to tremble at its beams. He turned to me, finally, eyes rimmed with something too heavy to name. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't know how to carry all of it, the old and the new. I thought if I left it behind, it'd stay there. I stepped forward. But we're not luggage, Brandon. We're legacy. And legacy doesn't stay in the back lot. He nodded slowly. But the damage, oh, it had been done. The trust I'd held in him, quiet, enduring, unconditional, had been chipped away one small choice at a time. Until now, under the soft lights of his wedding, I could see it for what it was. A bridge burned not by flames, but by silence. I left before the bouquet toss. Told Kayla I had a long drive ahead and that the cat, Muffin sweet thing, was likely pacing the windowsill in wait. She hugged me, slower this time, holding on like someone who'd just realized the treasure in her hands. I'm glad you came, she whispered. I'm glad I did too, I said. And I meant it. Brandon didn't walk me out. I didn't expect him to. The vineyard had gone quiet, guests returning to their tables, music low and uncertain. I slid into the Tesla, the leather seat still warm from the evening air, and sat for a long moment with the windows cracked just enough to hear the distant pulse of celebration that no longer felt like mine. Isolation doesn't always look like loneliness. Sometimes it's a choice, a necessary stillness after a storm. That drive home, winding through backroads and sleepy hollers, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow, like I'd carried a truth too long and finally set it down, only to realize the weight had become part of me. The headlights carved silence through cypress-lined roads. I passed fields where fireflies danced like old spirits. The same roads I'd driven Brandon on as a boy, to piano lessons, to the county fair, to his mother's grave on Sundays. Those memories whispered from the shadows, soft and unforgiving. At home I didn't turn on the porch light. I sat on the couch with a blanket and the scent of old books, and I didn't cry. Not quite. But I let the ache have space. Sometimes silence isn't about retreating. It's about honoring what was lost. That night I wrote in my journal, not with anger, not even with sadness, but with clarity. He's not mine to save anymore. He belongs to the world now. I only hope the world teaches him what love without condition looks like, and what it costs to forget it. The days that followed passed like molasses, slow, sticky with thought. I moved through my routines quietly. Tea at sunrise, deadheading roses by mid-morning, watching the mockingbirds quarrel over the feeder by dusk. But inside, my soul was a turning wheel. There's a peculiar ache that comes not from betrayal, but from being slowly made invisible. Brandon hadn't slammed a door or thrown a cruel word my way. No, he'd simply edited me out. Softly. Thoroughly. And when you've given pieces of yourself, years, meals, comfort, the kind of love that doesn't need thanks, that absence echoes. I stopped going to the diner. Skipped Thursday bridge with the girls. Even Muffin sensed it, curling tighter beside me, purring low as if to say, I know. Grief doesn't always come in the loss of a person. Sometimes, it's the loss of what you thought you were to someone. One evening, I pulled out a faded cardboard box from the closet, full of old photos and notes from Brandon's childhood. Crayon drawings with Miss Ellie is the best, scrawled across them. A birthday card from age 14 that read, Thanks for always showing up, even when I don't say it enough. A dried boutonniere from his senior prom, still faintly fragrant. I sat cross-legged on the floor, holding those paper ghosts in my lap, feeling their weight settle. Where did we begin to drift? I wondered. Was it in the way I stayed silent that day outside the hardware store? Was it in letting him choose distance without asking why? A letter rested at the bottom of the box, one I'd written years ago but never sent, after his mother passed. In it, I'd told him how proud Deborah would have been, how she used to hum lullabies into his baby curls, how I'd do everything I could to carry her love forward. I read it aloud into the quiet room, my voice soft and breaking. I never wanted to replace her, only to honor her. And in that moment, I realized the ache wasn't about Brandon forgetting me. It was about me forgetting myself, what I was worth, even outside his memory. It was time to return. Not to him but to me. 3 weeks passed before I heard from him. The leaves had turned fully by then. Russet, gold, and crimson dripping from the oaks like they couldn't hold on any longer. I was out in the garden, pruning back the hydrangeas before frost could claim them, when the sound of tires crunching gravel stirred Muffin from her perch. A car pulled into the drive. Not just any car, his car. Midnight blue, polished too clean for country roads. He stepped out slow, suit jacket slung over one shoulder, looking like a man who hadn't slept right since the wedding. I didn't move. Miss Ellie, he said. His voice was lower, rougher somehow. Not sick, just stripped. Afternoon, I answered, brushing my gloves off. He stood there, fumbling. I brought something. I raised an eyebrow. He reached into the back seat and pulled out something wrapped in brown paper and string. Delicate, square, careful. He handed it to me without meeting my eyes. I undid the twine, peeled back the wrapping, and there she was, Deborah, smiling from a frame I hadn't seen in years. The photo from her 25th birthday, hair in curls, holding baby Brandon on her hip. Below it, pressed behind glass, was a copy of that crayon drawing. Miss Ellie is the best. Aged and wrinkled but still bright. My breath caught. I found it all after the wedding, he said quietly. And I realized you weren't in the photos because I wasn't ready to face the truth. What truth? I asked, voice steadier than I felt. That I wouldn't be standing here, in this life, with this wife, with this future, if it weren't for you. His voice cracked then. And I've been running from that truth for years. I looked down at the frame again. 2 women. One gone too soon. One still standing. There's a part of you in everything I am, he said. And I wanted to bring it back to where it belongs. Silence stretched between us, warm this time. Honest. I don't expect forgiveness, he added. But I needed to say it. Out loud. Finally. I traced my thumb over Deborah's smile. You know, I said softly, she always knew you'd come back around. Said you had a good heart, even when it was stubborn. He smiled, small, worn. Thank you, I said. And I meant it. Some gestures don't fix the past. But they offer something else, a new page. A softer beginning. After that afternoon, things didn't snap back into place like a puzzle. No, healing is quieter than that. Slower. Like rain softening hardened earth before anything dares to bloom. Brandon began calling once a week. Not long conversations, but thoughtful ones. He'd ask how the roses were holding up, or if I'd seen the latest church bulletin. Little things. But that's where real bridges begin. Not with grand gestures, but with steady steps. One Sunday, I found a fresh envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a handwritten note, shaky and uneven like someone unused to the practice. Miss Ellie, I told Kayla about the Sunday walks, the church bake sales, how you used to let me borrow your car to impress girls but always made me fill the tank first. She said she wants to meet that part of my life. And I want her to meet you properly. We're coming next weekend if that's all right. Love, Brandon. My eyes filled before I could finish the last line. That Saturday I baked lemon bars, the recipe Deborah passed down, all tart and soft with just a dusting of powdered sugar. I even wore her old apron, the pink one with sunflowers and a pocket always filled with tissue. When they arrived, Kayla stepped out holding a bouquet of wildflowers and hugged me like she'd known me her whole life. Brandon kissed my cheek. It wasn't performative. It was reverent. We walked the garden paths together, Kayla asking questions, Brandon sharing stories I thought he'd forgotten. And when the sun dipped low, casting golden lines through the oak branches, I showed them the frame he'd brought, now hanging just above the fireplace, flanked by 2 taper candles. They stood there, silent, and I saw Kayla slip her fingers through his. Not for show but support. Later, before they left, Brandon said something that nestled in my heart like a lullaby. I don't want to hide you anymore. I want our children, when the time comes, to know where I came from. Who got me here? I held his hand. Then let them know you came from a house that smelled like lemon bars, drove a Buick full of gardening gloves, and loved you long before you ever wore a suit. He nodded, tears brimming. Growth doesn't erase pain, but it transforms it into something usable. We were climbing, my dear. Slowly but together. The weeks that followed stitched themselves into something almost holy. Not perfect, never that. But full of small, quiet reckonings that mended places I didn't know were torn. Brandon began visiting on his own. Sometimes with Kayla, sometimes not. He'd help me carry groceries, fix the porch swing, even sat on the floor once helping Muffin chase a feather toy like he was 16 again. We didn't talk much about the wedding. Some wounds don't need reopening. They need tending gently, in the background. One Saturday morning, we found ourselves sorting through an old box of Deborah's things. It had been sitting in my attic for decades, filled with cassette tapes, journals, a recipe book with stains from years of spaghetti Sundays. Brandon picked up one of the tapes and smiled softly. She used to play this when she cleaned the kitchen, he said. That Etta James song. What was it called? At last, I said. He nodded. She'd hum it while scrubbing the stove. I chuckled. And you'd slide around the linoleum in socks, thinking you were James Brown. We both laughed. The first real, open laugh in a long time. It echoed through the house like an old friend returning. Later that afternoon, I walked him out to the car. Before he got in, he turned to me. I've been thinking, he said, about how I've lived my life trying to prove I'm more than where I came from. I tilted my head. And what have you decided? That I'm not more. I'm because of you. Because of Mom. Because of everything I was taught in that old Buick and this creaky house. His voice trembled, but he didn't look away. I want to name our first daughter after you. Or at least give her your middle name. My hand went to my chest, unthinking. Brandon, you've given me more than I deserved, he said. It's time I gave something back. I didn't need the name. Didn't need the gesture. But my dear, it was the intention, the acknowledgement, the space he was carving in his future to hold me. That sealed it. That night I journaled simply. He found the way back. Not because I let him, but because I stood still long enough for him to remember where I was. The day Brandon brought me to speak at his company's foundation's luncheon was the day I knew the arc had come full circle. It was held in a sleek glass building in downtown Atlanta, all chrome elevators and fussy hors d'oeuvres. Not my usual stomping ground, but I wore my best cardigan, rose pink, with pearl buttons, and pinned Deborah's cameo brooch just over my heart. Brandon introduced me not as a neighbor, not even as family friend, but as the woman who taught me how to show up before I knew what showing up meant. I walked to that podium, my cane tapping soft against the stage, and looked out at a sea of well-pressed suits and wary eyes. And I told them about the Buick. About the boy who once learned the value of full gas tanks and folded laundry. About a woman who left too soon, and another who stayed behind not to take her place, but to carry her memory like a lantern. I didn't talk about shame. I didn't mention the wedding, but I talked about roots, about how we grow not away from them but through them. And as I spoke, I saw something settle over Brandon's face. Peace. After the applause, he held my hand all the way back to the car, helped me in, buckled the seatbelt like I was glass, which in a way I suppose we all are once we've lived long enough. Back home he walked me to the porch. And before he left, he turned and said, "You know, I've stopped thinking of that Buick as old. Oh, I think of her as loyal and brave." I smiled, eyes misting. She was both. And so were we. And with that he left, not just as a man but as someone returned. It's been nearly a year since that wedding. And my dear, life has quieted in all the best ways. Brandon and Kayla visit once a month now. Sometimes with news of doctor visits and baby name debates. Sometimes just with pie. The Tesla still purrs in the driveway, but I drive her less these days. Not out of spite, but because I don't need to prove anything anymore. That boy, that man, he remembers now. Last week, a package arrived with no return label. Inside was a leather-bound photo album, embossed with gold lettering, where I came from. First page held that picture of me beside the Buick, hair windblown, smile wide. Next page, Brandon in overalls, barefoot in my kitchen, licking batter from a wooden spoon. Each page a memory returned. Each one a thread rewoven. At the very back there was a note. "Miss Ellie, this album is for our daughter one day, so she knows what strength looks like, what kindness looks like, what home truly means. Love, Brandon." I sat on the porch for a long time after reading that. Muffin in my lap, a breeze carrying the smell of magnolia. And in that moment, I felt no sting, no ache. Only a kind of stillness that comes when something long broken finally lays down its fight. Forgiveness doesn't always wear grand gestures. Sometimes it shows up in scrapbooks, in phone calls, in the voice of someone finally willing to see you whole. And I reckon that's all I ever wanted. If he mocked my old car, so I drove my brand new Tesla to his wedding, stirred something familiar in your soul. I hope you'll leave a note below and tell me which part lingered. Share this with someone who might need it too. Someone who's been quietly faithful, even while forgotten. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this one, well, subscribe, my dear. I'll be right here when you're ready. We all deserve to be remembered, not for what we drive, but for who we carried when no one else would.